We often view Victorian dolls as charming relics of a bygone era, but in the hands of a ward matron, they became instruments of control. These toys weren't just gifts, they were psychological anchors intended to reset the female psyche. Discover how porcelain became a cage for those deemed hysterical. This is the past of medicine. When you picture a 19th century asylum for women, what comes to mind? For many of us, it's pure Gothic horror. Long, dark hallways, a scream echoing in the distance, maybe the clank of chains. For a long, long time, that was the reality for women labeled insane. Madness in women was seen not just as an illness, but as a deviation from their expected, gentle nature. A wildness that had to be broken with brute force. Female patients were subjected to treatments that were essentially torture. They were chained to walls, locked in collars, and strapped into chairs designed for total control, not comfort. The belief was that these mad women weren't really human anymore, and the only thing left to do was physically contain them. These places, often called madhouses, were defined by neglect and cruelty. They were horribly overcrowded, with women packed in so tightly, they'd share a single room with 6 or 7 others. In all that filth and brutality, death was a constant, almost expected part of daily life. It was a system so broken and inhumane that something had to give. A change had to come. And when it finally did, it came with a hopeful, progressive new name: moral treatment. Out of the darkness of the madhouse, a new idea started to shine. It was called moral treatment, which came from the French traitement moral. It wasn't just about being moral in an ethical sense, it was about caring for the patient's emotional and mental state. Suddenly, the insane weren't seen as wild animals, but as people who, with some kindness and patience, might just get better. A French doctor named Philippe Pinel was a huge part of this. In 1792, he famously ordered the chains to be taken off his male patients at a Paris hospital. And 2 years later, he did the same for the female inmates at Salpêtrière. Instead of fear and punishment, he prescribed fresh air, kind contact, and purposeful activities. In England, a Quaker named William Tuke was horrified after a friend, a woman named Hannah Mills, died in the York Asylum under shady, neglectful circumstances. So, in 1796, Tuke founded the York Retreat. It was the complete opposite of a typical asylum. It was out in the quiet countryside and run like a big, kind family. There were no chains, and physical punishment was banned. Instead, patients got into occupational therapy. This was highly gendered. Men would do light farm work, while women would sew and knit. The whole point was to give them a sense of purpose and help them relearn self-control through gentle guidance, not force. This new way of thinking was brought to America by Dorothea Dix, a reformer who campaigned relentlessly to build new hospitals after seeing the horrors in her country's jails. Inspired by Tuke and Pinel, she pushed for huge, airy asylums on beautiful, peaceful grounds. The ideal was that the environment itself could help cure you. Moral treatment was a huge step up. It swapped obvious brutality for routine and psychological methods, trying to create a normal life inside the asylum walls. It seemed like a perfect, compassionate solution. But inside this gentle new world, new and more subtle types of control were starting to grow, aimed specifically at women. To get how a simple doll could be twisted into a tool for mind games, you have to understand what dolls meant for girls and women back then. In the 19th century, a doll wasn't just a kid's toy. It was a powerful piece of culture, like a miniature training manual for girls. From the time they were little, girls learned what their futures were supposed to look like by playing with dolls. Victorian society had this ideal of the true woman. She was supposed to be pure, gentle, and totally focused on her home and future family. Dolls were like tiny practice dummies for this role. Girls practiced being moms by dressing, feeding, and rocking their doll babies. They learned how to be a good hostess by staging little tea parties. Playing with dolls was how society's expectations got wired into their brains. But it got even weirder. Victorian culture was weirdly public about death, and dolls were even used to prepare girls for their role as the family's chief mourner. Some girls had what were basically death kits for their dolls. These came with a doll, a tiny coffin, and little mourning clothes. It sounds morbid to us, but it taught girls the right way to act when someone died, which was a big deal back then. So, this little porcelain figure represented a woman's entire, pre-approved life path, from being a mother to being a grieving widow. It was a symbol of being nurturing, domestic, and compliant. And that powerful symbolism was about to be put to a very different use. As moral treatment became the new standard, asylum doctors were looking for anything that could create a calm, healing environment. They moved away from physical restraints and toward psychological ones, tools that could soothe patients and help them control themselves. So for their female patients, what could be a more perfect tool than a doll? Now, here's where the historical record gets a little fuzzy. There isn't a pile of official evidence stating that doll therapy was a widespread, documented practice in 19th century asylums. But the logic is disturbingly easy to follow, and it makes for a chilling thought experiment. Imagine a woman diagnosed with hysteria, a junk diagnosis for anything from anxiety and depression to simply not wanting to fit into a man's world. For a woman institutionalized for being too loud, too emotional, or rejecting her domestic duty, giving her a doll could seem like a therapeutic shortcut. It tapped right into all that training she'd had since she was a little girl. The act of holding and caring for a doll could be genuinely calming. It was a distraction, a focus for all that nervous energy. For a woman who felt lost and alone in an asylum, a doll could feel like a link to the life she was supposed to want. But this is where therapy and control get all mixed up. This treatment, if it was used, wasn't about empowering the patient. It was about forcing her into a very specific, socially approved box. The message was loud and clear. Your real thoughts and feelings got you locked up in here. But if you pretend to be a good little mother with this doll, you'll be calm. You'll be manageable. We'll say you're getting better. It wasn't therapy. It was infantilization. It treated adult women like children who needed to be retaught how to behave by their asylum parents. The doll was the literal symbol of this. It encouraged women to regress, to find comfort in a state of enforced immaturity. That matron handing a doll to a patient wasn't just giving a gift. She was prescribing a role. The comfort was real, but the price was her patient's true self. It was a cruel comfort, a gentle cage made of porcelain and lace. If this kind of doll therapy was practiced, it wasn't a cure. It was a way to psychologically contain someone, and the consequences would have been devastating. By rewarding this performance of quiet maternal behavior, it would have smothered any real expression of a woman's feelings. Anger, frustration, ambition, the very things that might have landed her in the asylum in the first place, weren't dealt with. They were just hidden under a quiet, doll-cradling performance. This kind of enforced aggression would have stopped any real healing in its tracks. Instead of learning to understand their own emotions, patients would have been taught to pour them into caring for an object. It reinforces the whole sexist idea that women are just unstable, emotional creatures who can be calmed down with baby-related duties. It wasn't about healing a person. It was about making a patient less trouble. Think about the labor therapy that was part of moral treatment. Men did things like gardening or farm work. Women almost always did domestic tasks like sewing and laundry. If doll therapy was in the mix, that labor might have been sewing doll clothes. The line between therapy and forced child's play gets completely erased. The asylum, which was supposed to be a place to heal, just becomes a miniature version of the same society that trapped them. The cruelest irony is that many women were locked up for defying these exact gender roles. Then, to be told that the only way to get out is to embrace an infantile version of those roles is just twisted. The doll becomes a silent reminder of the box she's supposed to fit into. It wasn't a tool for healing trauma. It was a tool for erasing a person and replacing her with a more acceptable, doll-like version of herself. The story of the Asylum's doll doesn't just end in the 19th century. The core problem it represents, that razor-thin line between caring for someone and controlling them, is something we still deal with today, especially in dementia care. In nursing homes and memory care units, doll therapy has made a comeback. For patients with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, giving them a lifelike doll can have some amazing benefits. Studies show it can reduce anxiety, make them more social, and give them a sense of purpose. When your own memories are fading, the simple act of rocking a baby can be incredibly grounding. It taps into old, deep-seated instincts of being a parent and gives them a chance to nurture something. And yet, the ethical debate is almost identical to the one we've been talking about. Critics worry that it's infantilizing. Is it right to trick an adult into thinking a toy is a real baby? Is this real therapy, or are we just treating our elders with the same condescending attitude, soothing their distress by reducing them to children? Families especially can find it deeply uncomfortable to see a once capable parent now cooing at a doll. Proponents of modern doll therapy say the key is to let the person with dementia lead. If they find comfort and purpose in the doll, then it's a valuable tool that's better than just loading them up on medication. This modern debate makes us look back at the Asylum's doll in a new light. It shows that the move from iron chains to psychological tools was a big step, but it also reveals a tricky truth. Control doesn't always look like a shackle. Sometimes it looks like a gift. The story of the Asylum's doll is a powerful reminder that even when we mean well, the line between care and coercion can get dangerously blurry. It forces us to constantly ask ourselves if we're prioritizing a person's dignity over our own convenience. The porcelain doll in the Victorian asylum and the therapy doll in the modern nursing home are both symbols of a question we're still struggling with. How do we offer comfort without taking away a person's identity? How do we care for the vulnerable without caging them, however gently, in our own expectations? If you found this deep dive into a dark corner of history interesting, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and like the video. These stories are a huge part of understanding how we got to where we are today. Let us know in the comments what other piece of hidden history you'd like us to uncover next. Thanks for watching. Stay curious and take care of yourself.